Hi, and welcome to the Exponential Europe podcast. My name is Jason Lim. I am your host and your guide in this journey, being a half German, half South Korean who grew up in Thailand. I enjoy the opportunity to go all around Europe together with you, meeting people from all sorts of different backgrounds, hearing their story and their passion for multiplication, and for you to get to know them with me, because these people are what make up the community, because that's what Exponential Europe is. We are a community, but not just a community for community's sake. We are a community with a cause, and that is to see reproduction and multiplication become the norm again in the behavior and language of the church in Europe. And I'm here with a very special guest, the Øystein Gjerme, the second Norwegian on this podcast now. And by no means is it lesser just because you're number two. But maybe tell us a little bit about who you are, the most important facts that people should know about you. And I've heard different titles for you in the Exponential Europe circle. So I don't know if I am the best person to introduce you. Maybe you do that yourself.
Well, you know, when it comes to titles, I'm not so very concerned about the titles. My role in Exponential Europe is basically to try to say something about what this great community has cost and brought about in the North American context. We see that right now they're changing the title of the main gathering over there in Orlando to Global Gathering, just because church planting is such an important issue to bring about in the Christian church of today. And the question about multiplication and reproduction is so important. And the main character in all of this, I would say, is Dave Ferguson, the founder and the CEO. He is the visionary leader. So my role is basically to try to be some of I don't like the name front face, but I try to represent him well in Europe and be as wide as possible when it comes to the different streams of Christian churches and denominations and movements and organizations that can participate, and at the same time be as focused as possible on where we're going with Exponential Europe. So you're our Dave Ferguson. You're the avatar. I wouldn't compare myself to such a great leader as him, but I try to represent him at least at Exponential Europe.
But you are originally from Norway.
Yep, Bergen, Norway.
Which is like the rainiest city of Norway or something like that?
Yeah, if my wife was here, she would stop me from saying that because she doesn't like me to. She says it's bad commercial for Bergen. It rains a lot, and it really does. But we have a great life there. It's the second largest city of Norway. Used to be the capital 1,000 years ago. But Norway is a small country. So I work also in Oslo. I have an office there. So I'm in between the cities. Yep.
And you planted a church there how many years ago?
20 years ago. We just celebrated our 20th anniversary. So the church was planted in 2004, and we're now a multi-site congregation with 7 locations. The largest one being in the Bergen area, where
are all the locations in the same city, or are you across the nation?
We are across the country. So we're in the north and we're in the east, and most of the churches are in the west around our area.
But you have also, if I'm not mistaken, spent time in the U.S.
Yes.
So as you just came there yesterday. So
yeah, a little jet lagged. Yeah.
But what was the time you spent in the U.S. and what kind of differences did you experience, kind of experiencing those two worlds, or would you say it's fairly similar?
Yeah, it's a good question. I spent the last half of the 90s studying theology in America. Reason being that I grew up in a Pentecostal environment in Norway. And when we say Pentecostal in the Nordic countries, people must remember that the first national movements within Pentecostalism were the Nordic movements, like the Norwegian Pentecostal movement is the oldest, together with the Swedish and the other ones. So while many places in the world it's Assemblies of God, that's the organizational name.
Right.
We are national movements because we're older than. And we are in a Lutheran context. So the spiritual temperament of the Nordic region is very much flavoring our Pentecostalism. So I just want to say that there's not a lot of snake handling happening out there in
There aren't a lot. Are there a lot of snakes in Norway? Do you have snakes?
No, they're very small. But we do have ice bears and stuff like that.
There you go.
Now, the U.S. Next year we will celebrate 200 years of immigration from Norway. A lot of Norwegians went to North America. Mm-hmm. Between 800,000 and 1 million went. So in many ways, I find the term North Atlantic culture to be a good way of trying to understand the culture between the Nordic countries, the British Isles, and Canada, US. You know, there is like a North Atlantic culture. So in many ways, a Norwegian will feel as connected to like the Midwestern America culture as to Southern European culture.
Wow.
Yeah. So when I read an American book about church growth, it's fairly easy for us to culturally navigate through that.
Yeah. Interesting. Well, and whenever one goes to Scandinavia, their English is just impeccable.
Small countries, we must learn the languages in order to be able to communicate in the world.
That's good. So you have a family. You mentioned your wife.
Yes, my wife was with me here on this trip. Our youngest is now 19.
Wow.
He's in the military. 20-year-old, he is in business school, and the 25-year-old, she got married last year and is now working as a teacher.
So empty nesters now?
Yes, we are.
New phase?
Yeah, which is a new phase. We're fairly young to hit that stage, but we're happy with that. We made a decision to not work ourselves to death just because we don't have kids in the house. But it is different because the limit, there's a lot more freedom.
There's the at least the temptation now to like.
Yeah. She works in the business world, and of course she preaches at church and helps out in church a lot. But we found it to be more of feasible way of doing to lead a fairly large church. That we are not both of us on staff in the church. Right. We made that decision. That's for our family.
Yeah.
No one else to do that the same way we did. But she's a very strong leader and works well in the business community. And that also helps us build a lot of bridges to society in Norway. Yeah.
So you are also, I think, the leader of the Pentecostal denomination. Is that correct? When you look back at those years in the U.S., and now, do you feel the topic of multiplication that has shifted and changed within your own denomination, of the Pentecostal denomination in Norway? Has it always been within kind of the core DNA of it, and it's just the forms and the practices have changed, or would you say the principle has grown towards more importance within the denomination?
I think that the Pentecostal movement of Norway, we use the word movement, not denomination, is because it is a movement. Right. It's just 120 years old. And when we look at the different indicators of how movements grow and function, it's not always understood intellectually, but it is in the DNA. It's rapid multiplication, it's pioneer leaders, it's flexible methods, and contagious relationships, to mention 4 things. And when those things kind of is in the impulse, then there is growth and expansion and multiplication. So we can actually trace that in our short history. So I basically have to, as a movement leader now, say, what are the indicators that took us here? And where is the lost art of actually making this thing grow again? That's basically where we are as a movement.
In some way, it's rediscovering those, like you mentioned, is it Steve Addison's movement that changed the world? Yeah. Principles, 5 principles.
Yeah.
It's essentially just rediscovering those things that are already embedded in the history of the movement. Do you think it's kind of, why does it have to be rediscovered if it's already so ingrained within
But I don't think it is. It's an impulse that came naturally.
Right.
But it can easily be lost. So, for instance, on this side of the summer, we've had two instances. I cannot say where, but we have two instances where the churches were almost closing the doors. I mean, it was red zone. And then we go in and we coach them and we help them, and we get to the point where we need to say that we need a total change of leadership and total change of culture here in order to see children, youth, to put 100 years back, life back into this thing. But the temptation for a group of elderly people with a building to get a preacher to continue doing the meetings, it is so close that if that person raises their hand and says, I'll come and do that, then they'll opt for that option. So, and that is lack of understanding.
Let's flesh that out. Why do you think that temptation is so big to say, if we just had someone that was willing to come and keep us going, we'd rather do that?
I think that the longer it has been since last time there was a large change in praxis, the harder it is to do something new. And that's one of the signs of movements. It's rapid. It's moving quickly. Multiplication must have some kind of speed to it. So some people say that you should not do change just for change's sake, and that's totally wrong. You should do change just for change's sake, because then you train the organization and the people to be flexible. I find that one of the scariest things about movements is when people get positional. At the moment when people get concerned with titles, positions, and organizational charts, that's when things get stale. So I think one of the signs of healthy movements and dynamic organizations is that, hey, this thing can change, but it changes for the positive into the future. So I think it's possible to lose the dynamic of being a movement. We see that. We have 340 churches in our movement, in our country, and I can honestly say that we are not engaged with all of them. Not all of them says, hey, we'll follow. And that's a sorrow to carry.
That's an interesting point to say. In order for there to be multiplication, it requires a culture of flexibility and being dynamic, being, like you were saying before, with what Steve Addison talks about, kind of the willingness to adapt to the changing context around you. I remember there was a leader in our church plant, or our church, who suddenly came to this like epiphany, and she's like, oh, we'll never get there. Like, you plant a church and then you wait for the church to become established. So like there's a planting phase and it's all kind of crazy and dynamic. And then at some point though, everything settles in. And then she realized, because we were constantly changing things and adapting, she was, like what? That's a wrong kind of paradigm, that there comes a point where things just kind of stabilize, and then we've finally made it. We've finished. Do you agree with that it's important for a church to not communicate to their congregation that kind of, the planting phase is over? How do you move from that planting, which is a little bit more dynamic and flexible, and then, some sort of institutionalization or stabilizing of the structures is unavoidable and perhaps necessary? How do you keep that dynamic going?
I think we'll just lived through this. We just celebrated our 20th anniversary. Now we have a big theater downtown our city with 960 seats, cool building, 2 services on a Sunday, that building, plus our international community, plus the church plants. So from a Norwegian perspective, it's cool. It's good. We had 1,000 people last Sunday. However, that depends on your perspective. That depends on what you see and where you're going. So for me as a leader, it's important to remind, first and foremost, myself and my closest team, and then the church, that what you're seeing is not where we're going. I mean, we're going somewhere else. So what do we need to kind of shift around a little bit in order to open up space for a new growth? So I've been quoting a Chinese proverb all year. Best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. Second best time is today. And just lifting the parole of saying we want a new time of pioneering. We are not settling. And if you don't say that, then people believe what they see. They don't believe what you say. Because people get stuck in what they see. That's why it's a constant job to kind of lift people's perspective from what they see. I mean, if you see a 1,000 seat auditorium downtown and now you're paying on that mortgage and you're fine, then people think we have arrived.
We've made it.
We made it. And constantly opening up new... but then, so maybe I haven't developed this thought, and I'm going to work more on that. But it's like digging dikes. It's like, okay, now we reach this level, so we consolidate this field, then we clean some more forest, and then we make a new field, and we create a new dike and a new dike. And you have to every organization and movement must consolidate at one point, but not consolidate in order to become conservative and conserving, but in order to stand on that strength to do the next phase moving forward. Then we as leaders can also get tired. Like, I'm turning 50 next year. That's not a high age, but still I've been going at the same thing for 20 years with the same church, which means that there is another decade, and then there is another decade. And it really takes determination, and it takes stamina to work on the ability to renew one's own spiritual strength and stamina to continue on doing this thing.
That's such an important point. I think I know of a church plant in our city, or a church now. I don't know when to stop calling it a church plant. Who knows? The church planter who planted that church left after 10 years, and the church was kind of like, oh, finally we can, like, he was just constantly talking about, like, keep moving. Now he's gone, we can finally rest. How do you keep that stamina up as you as a leader and kind of an apostolic pioneering person without the team around you feeling like we've been going at this for 20 years.
Yeah.
Maybe we just need like a year of just resting or something.
Sure. No, I think I've been giving that a lot of thought all of these years. And one of the things that I saw early on was that the family that will make up the church, not all of them will be on mission. Some of them will be joining a local church, but they want to be in this kind of environment. So I have been very clear for 20 years about that all the stuff that I want to work with and the stuff that I see and what comes through the ministry that like, this is what I work on, I can't make the church participate in all of that. So over the years, I've been doing I've been the chairman for a college. From it was nothing to it was something. I was there for 18 years. I've been preaching all over. And I've been overseer at different churches, had different committee things, led the national church planting thing for the different movements. And now I lead the Pentecostal movement. So like, I have ministry stuff that I do when it comes to Exponential, multiplication, reproduction, church planters in Europe. The church family that I lead do not have to deal with all of those things. Like, I have different operative systems.
Yeah.
And I think that's a mistake that many ministers do, is that they bring their own ministry and their own ministry roles in a too large degree onto the local church family. You have to differentiate between what is local church family and what is ministry. Because local church families, they can't hear about all the stuff evangelistic and apostolic leaders are working with all week. It's just going to be too much.
Yeah.
So that differentiation has been very important to me. Mm-hmm. And at times I have also under-communicated the mission that me and my leaders are in compared to what we do in the local church.
Right.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you want to keep that dynamic going of making your church not feel like, oh yeah, we're settling, we're kind of taking root, we've made it, we've gotten to our goal, but you want to keep pushing them further to the next thing.
Yeah. And then understanding that there are circles in the church.
Yeah.
So in our bylaws and the way we work is that we say that there is an inner core of leaders. And then there is the group outside that's our church partners. Those are the vision carriers, the givers and the workers, and then it's the members outside of that again. And the members they're there, but they're passive. We can't volunteer them.
Yeah.
And then it's the hangarounds in the crowd.
Right.
So by differentiating between the different commitment levels that a church will make, you give the people the opportunity to volunteer when they can. You turn it around. The leader is not huddling the people all the time to do stuff.
Right.
They say, hey, this is my level of commitment. So you work with them. So like my inner circle, they come to a lot of stuff in church, which means that we don't have to be up there on the platform on Sunday and vouch for everything we're doing this week, because we have different circles that come to different events.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. Did you plant 20 years ago already automatically with a multiplication mindset?
I would say yes. It's in our vision statement that our church vision is to reproduce and multiply into new cultures and geographical areas.
Would you say your thinking on multiplication has shifted and changed somewhat in those 20 years?
If it has shifted? Well, multiplication thinking, when I first got it, was through small groups and cell churches. So the concentration I did when I did my Master's of Divinity was in small groups. So we looked at all these different systems from all the large churches in the world. Dion Robert, Cesar Castellanos, Yonggi Cho, all of this, Larry Stockdale. I mean, we looked at all of them and really dug in and looked at systems. My takeaway from that was, of course, this multiplication is the idea of the kingdom. This is how it's supposed to be working.
Right.
But and early on, I was lucky to understand that ideals is something you should aim for, but you shouldn't kill yourself over the fact that you're not living in it. But it's possible to have an ideal and just aim in that direction. I don't think it has changed a lot. It is still my conviction. But I also have to admit that in the Western world, the gravitation goes towards reproduction. And the gravitation tends to go in direction of addition, So I have to watch it in my language and in the language of the people around me, that we can easily opt backwards into this addition culture.
Have you seen that gotten more or less in the last 20 years?
No, I find it to be a tension to manage. At least in the...
Was it easier to fight that pull over? Did you say the pull towards addition has gotten more in the last 20 years?
No, I don't know. I haven't thought about that. If it's easy, if it was easier before than it is now. Obviously, in our part of the world, in the Nordic countries, we find it harder to recruit leaders to work in this sector of like being ministers, being pastors and leaders. And we have our culture have a very stale understanding, I would say, about what a church is. Mm-hmm. So in that regard, it's tougher now. It's maybe less movemental. Mm-hmm. It's fairly long since we've heard about visions about house churches that would like saturate a city. And we don't hear much about that.
What do you think is the cultural? You were saying that there's a cultural kind of, maybe opposition is the wrong word, but the cultural context that we find ourselves in isn't necessarily a breeding ground for multiplication thinking. What is it within our culture or the Western culture that kind of hinders that?
Well, maybe I think a little bit politically about this, just because like I'm now on the Norwegian Christian Council, and I work with denominations and leaders and the place of religion in society. So maybe it's tainted in that direction a little bit too much. But I find that as opposition from main culture against Christianity, I mean, increased secularization pushes the Christian church to the fringes of society. And then at the end, when we used to, just a few decades ago, to be the majority religious group in our country, now we're one of them, and we're kind of at the outskirts, we can feel ourselves. Then we are working on how do we take our place in society in such a way that it is seen and that it is respected, and by doing that we can opt to the temptation of creating more organizational structures than grassroots movements.
So we are reacting to a feeling of having lost something, right? And so we're trying to like put our stakes in the ground so that we're not pushed further away.
Yes, and if we do that in an institutional way, then it because the opting for the institutional way is a temptation that can be there on a political level.
Right.
And I don't think that's the way forward.
Right.
I think that, like for instance, in Scandinavian culture and Northern Europe, I meet people that say, well, now it's all about microchurches and movements, and we can meet in homes and stuff. Okay, and then we say, well, in the Nordic countries, up where we live, we have 4 distinct seasons. For more than 150 years, 200 years, we've always had a third space in our everyday life. People have their home, their workplace, and their prayer house, their church, or their civic society house. There is always, because you can't meet under a tree. So cool. just the internet, the spaces where we do different things. So, and also for 500 years in the Nordic countries, religion has been something public.
Right.
If you look at the nations, other nations in Europe also, the Catholic South, the Orthodox East, the Protestant North, in every nation, state and religion has some kind of cooperation historically, which means that the public view religion and worldviews, the religious activities, as something public. So I'm saying to the Pentecostal movement in Norway, we need to understand that people want their faith life to be public. So we need to match the public side or of our religious life to the expectations of society. If not, we will be sectarian.
Right.
And there is a space to take there. And I think we can totally take a larger space if we move out of the small thinking that I find in so many churches in Europe. And then I'm not saying let's go for mega churches in Europe, but sometimes the small thinking, that's not about philosophy. It's about limits in the head. We can saturate society with the gospel. We can build churches everywhere because that's what kingdom says. But culture hinders us. There is a sectarian side to grassroots movements, and we have to watch it so we don't get stuck there. we should be open, we should be friendly, we should be hospitable, and we should be relevant. That's my vision for church.
Yeah, that's great. And I think like you were talking about, what I tell people, we can function in two modes. One is the mode of maintenance, and one is the mode of mission or multiplication, right? And the mode of maintenance is kind of driven out of fear, out of, oh, there's only, say, 2% Christians in Germany. How do we make sure it doesn't become 1%, right? It's how do we retain what we have and don't lose that? And not so much, oh, what about the 98%? How do we actually reach those, right? So it's a different kind of mode, but one is more risky, it seems, and one is a little bit more on the short-sighted perspective, I guess. It's risky. I would say the maintenance is much more risky long-term. But right now, it feels very risky on the first step. So I can totally relate to what you're saying, because it's interesting in a post-Christendom cultural situation that we were in, different to a pre-Christian situation like in other parts of the world, where they started off at the fringes and the movement builds from the fringes. We have been pushed to the fringes, so our starting point is a different, the openness then, because you feel like you've lost so much, right? People, I like what one church consultant said. He says, people don't fear change, they fear loss. If I tell you you get $300 more next month, that's also a change, but they don't mind that. But people fear losing what they have. Like, we're going back to that church you were talking about, right? If we can just have someone come in and keep doing what we experienced before, or when I do church consulting questions, when I do church consulting, I tell the churches, I'm not here to help you go back to the good old days. Like, that's not the process we're going to go. We're going to finish that chapter, celebrate what the Lord has done, but now we have to write a new chapter. But the expectation is always, can someone come in and get us back to where we were?
Yep.
And that's kind of like, it's not a forward-thinking perspective. It's more of a, oh man, Egypt wasn't so bad.
Yeah.
You know, let's just go back to it. And then you have to be Moses and disappoint. Kind of
it's the invitation, can someone from your church come and sing and play? So the idea of coming to sing and play is nothing evil, nothing wrong, but it is within a paradigm.
Yeah.
And breaking through to another paradigm always comes with a battle in every organization and with every innovation. So the question is, do we have the stamina and do we have the leadership in order to take the battle and break through to a new paradigm? And it's a delay. So much in society has changed. And even when I look at different organizational structures, pedagogics, technology, I mean, in many religious groups also, changes have happened. But in large parts of the movement that I lead, there is a delay. People, like, for instance, we know now that training children to follow Jesus, mom is the most important. Second is camp, and third is father, and youth pastor is number 7. And church is after that, I think, on the list. That's how kids are trained in Christian faith and how they stay in Christian faith. So a lot of the well-functioning churches have transitioned from only Sunday school to how can we cooperate with the home in order to do Christian education. But when I meet certain churches that are not connected, they still live in the paradigm of Sunday school. So the loss of why we don't have Sunday school is still there, while they could have opted for a more viable option, which research shows us, hey, any church with 3 children or 7 children can succeed when it comes to giving faith to the children if we cooperate with the home. So, and that's the pain of leading, is to, like, we have know-how that could help people succeed, but because the paradigm is stuck 30 years ago, people still feel lost. Yeah.
What is the reason for that delay? Because it's an interesting point you're making. Just today, we were talking about this. So my oldest, she's 8, and she has a very good friend or best friend in the neighborhood that they grew up together, same preschool, same neighborhood, same school now. But just because of the home situation being so different, it's so strange for the last 8 years you can just see them taking a very different track in life. Because the school can only do so much. And you can be like, oh, you can blame the school, the teacher's not, but like she came home the other day and she was talking about that they did a little math test and this one kid got like a very poor grade. And she was like, oh man, this kid, like, immediately kids thinking grades, and then you kind of are tempted to judge one another. And I told her, but like, just, I know what their home life is like. And just, that's where he gets shaped most, right? If the school struggles with the fact that they can have only so much impact, and then they hire people who come in and do more stuff at school. But if at home the child is not developed and there's not investment and there's not care, and they live in a home that's struggling with all sorts of different things, the program of school can only do so much. And I always tell people in my church, I know I know this has been your own biography and experience in church, and I think that's great. But if we just throw programs at these kids, there's only so much we can do. Like, what is the community that they're being built up within, both peer-to-peer, but also adults? Like you said, research shows that young people that are still strong in their faith look back to 5 key relationships that they have that walked with them relationally, spiritual parents, spiritual uncles and aunts, and who are those people? And that's not just programmatic. Not that programs are bad, but there's a process to it too. So what do you think is the delay of, there's research, but then we're just stuck in this, it comes late to us?
People believe what they see, they don't believe what we say. It comes back to that. A rural church can easily become a one-generational church. Like a church, if there was a fired up person in the 1970s that said, let's build a church out here, if that leader was not aware of, and they would have 20 kids in the Sunday school, then the parents would rally around that Sunday school and make that happen. But they would follow their kids until they were tweens and teenagers, and then young adults, and then they would go off to uni and study. And then if the kids then were not recruited in, then they would close down the Sunday school. And this is a story of the free churches also in the Nordic countries. I'm sad to say, but churches can tend to become one-generational. And an elderly minister in our movement in Norway, he said, if a church hasn't had a Sunday school the last 10 years, they will never have a Sunday school if major change does not happen. And this is a very gentle and nice minister. So he is not a bully.
Yeah.
But at one point, you need to say that.
Right.
You need to say those things. But also, like in the Protestant North, with strong free churches and strong churches, we have to admit that we have to have more flexible methods. We have to cooperate more with the home. And that's what, for the Exponential podcast listeners, is probably one of the things that's important for us to see, that we had 100 kids in Sunday school on Sunday, but that's rare many places in Europe. Most Sunday schools here in Europe would have people from 3 years old to 13 years old, and maybe 20 of them in total in a free church somewhere in Europe. But then we say, all right, maybe we can't do the classes. Maybe we can't do a rally in a big room on Sunday. But let's start cooperating with the home then. Mm-hmm. Let's take the software of the Christian faith and work it into the very fiber of how do we do it at home. And research says that's the best way to do it, which means we at the get-go, we have the upper hand pedagogically. So let's go for that.
How does multiplication, going back to that example you mentioned with, there was a great rally back in the 70s and then now, if you come in and you say, how does multiplication change the paradigm within that of how that story might have gone differently?
Well, I hope I answer your question correctly when I say this, that if we have faith that there is more, if we have faith in the fact that God still calls, He wants to expand, it should be natural that we grow and that more leaders are raised up. If we have that faith in the bottom of our gut, and we also passion is about what is rationally understood in the head, but also the fire in our heart. It's both things.
Yes.
It's not just rational and it's not just passion. So we need both. Then if we have that faith and we have that understanding, then we will create arenas within our Christian communities for people to take up that baton and move forward. So for instance, we have a fairly large church in Norwegian context. And out of the people we had last year, we had a little more than 40 young adults that joined our leadership initiative 1-year program. And that's just a percentage of the totality of the church. And that's what you need to learn to live with. I can't expect that 600-700 people would join our leadership initiative. I have to deal with the fact that out of all of these people, 40 of them said, hey, I'll raise my hand, train me as a leader. And then the funnel is disappointingly small at the end when you look at the amount of people that really raise their hand and say, I'll go for this.
But the opportunity you have with 40 people is...
But that's just how it is. So I always deal with funnels. I say, okay, if I have like for the movement now, I have 13,000 young children and youth. That's part of our children and youth department in our movement. I say, if 10% of them can go through a leadership program from they're 14 years old, and if only 1% of them say, I want to work in ministry when I grow up, that gives us 13 full-time workers every year. That's a very small number, but still it is a number. And
it's more than Jesus had.
That's been kind of difficult for me sometimes when I discuss, also in environments like Exponential and church growth environments. Leaders that have ideals that everyone should do everything because this is what everything is about, those kind of leaders get disappointed. You have to differentiate. We have a crowd, and then we have some people in the crowd that raise their hand and want to go full-time for this or just do all of this. Deal with it.
But there's such a potential in that small number. I think that's where multiplication is a comfort. That when you look at the vastness, or you, like you were saying, if you allow yourself to dream that big, multiplication gives you a great platform to do that on. Because if it's just like, I have to reach millions, it's like, how? No way. Then I have to dream small because I will die. Like I will be crushed by the expectation of that. But with multiplication, I can look at those 13 and be like, imagine, if they invest in another 13. Then it's like, oh, I can dream big now. It almost frees me up to be like, I can think, I can do small and invest in a perhaps smaller group, but the potential of that is so big, right?
It is. Creating relational environments for transformation and obedience and loving Christ is an absolute survival essentiality for the church. Totally. The biggest and the small. As Pentecostals, we always want everything to be big quickly. But honestly, the trending now is from success to authenticity. It is more important with authenticity than the excellence thing. And some people go way too, exaggerate the change. Authenticity is about being real. Is about not faking. It's about not hyping. But it doesn't mean that you shouldn't be excited and positive and work hard and do it with quality.
Right.
All of those things are still a part of authenticity. No, so one of the things is that in Western society is about liberty and freedom, you know? The number one value in Norway is independence. We're very freedom-oriented, liberty-oriented, and skeptical of authorities. No one should tell us what to do. And that also changes leadership, right? Mm-hmm. Because then you can't be an authoritative leader. You have to be an inviting leader. So the posture of leadership that I opt for and have to do is invitation. Mm-hmm. But then what you're inviting to must be so inspiring and so plausible as the best life option that people actually want to follow.
Right.
So it puts a lot of demand on us to kind of lift the gospel high and say, hey, this is a trustworthy gospel. This is a great life. Look how it works for some of us that have taken this option. Come in this direction. And that seems to be now in Norway changing. Since, for the first time since the early 80s, when they started censoring whether people had a personal Christian faith, it's been going down since the early 1980s. But this year it turned around, so it's flattening out. And more men are now saying they're personal Christians.
Wow.
So there is a shift happening. The Norwegian Lutheran State Church is growing. People are putting their membership into the church. There is something happening in culture. It's a surprising return of Christian faith.
That's wonderful. How hopeful for us, and what a great segue into finishing this episode. And we always want to encourage our listeners at the end of the episode to take a couple of minutes right after and pray. And bring some of the thoughts that might have been inspired or that have come up, and bring that before the Lord. What would you ask the listeners to be praying right after this episode?
Since we're in Europe, I would ask people to pray whether the Lord would show them some people that could be in that very ecosystem close to them, that they could make an extra invitation to participate in a closer environment, relational atmosphere, for catching the mission of Christ and becoming a community together. That's what I would ask, because I suppose most leaders are listening to this, and I tell all the young leaders that I work with that it all starts with a list. You got to have a pen and a paper, and you got to write down the names of the people that you sense the Lord is giving you to have a special care for. If you can put your arms around a group of young people or people, and you could give them some more attention for a season, then it's almost unbelievable what the Lord can do by doing that. But we have to let the Lord speak to us in order to connect with some people. That's what the Master did. John 1 is a story of Christ calling into a relational network, and a whole relational network comes and sees where he lives and follows him.
Thank you so much for that.